Alright, hello, and welcome to a Frostpunks 2 basic video. After doing a couple videos on breaking the game and getting all the achievements in it, I figured I might sit here and do kind of a basics video going over everything you see on screen, and a couple of things just to help the basic mechanics kind of make sense here. And so what we're going to start with for now is your resources and city problems. That's because that's going to be the very first thing you run into. So at the top of your user interface over here, in the center we have heat. This is extremely critical. Heat is made from the generator in your central district in the center of your city. It will use a combination, well, initially your generator can only use coal, and depending on whether you take the adaptive pumps generator or the oil pumps generator, which we'll get over to later, it will be able to also use oil and steam, or only use oil. But at the start of the game, you'll only have access to coal. Heat counteracts the cold problem. If you have a deficiency of heat, cold will begin to become a problem. We can show it right here if we turn off the generator and let time tick forward for just a moment. A lack of heat will cause cold to grow greatly and be a significant problem. Next, you have your shelter. Your communities need shelter, and on higher difficulties, they'll have a higher demand for shelter. The more people you have, the more shelter you're going to need. Shelter, like heat, counteracts cold. A lack of shelter will lead to cold growing. In either case, if cold ever grows, your disease will also grow. Disease can be caused by a number of buildings that you've constructed, but it's also largely caused usually by an increase of cold, squalor, or hunger. If disease grows, it will greatly impact your workforce, something that we'll get to next. And if disease becomes too out of control, your city may find itself shutting down. Meanwhile, if your cold gets too severe, people will start dying of frostbite. Squalor is largely caused by either a lack of materials or from various buildings, largely seen from progress-based buildings, something that we'll get into later. If squalor gets too high, your districts will start to sustain damage, which will be seen at a red bar near the bottom here when any of them are damaged. If they are damaged, you will be able to use prefabs to fix them. Speaking of prefabs, you do need to use prefabs to build your districts and buildings, which we will get to later into the video. Food is self-explanatory. Food counteracts hunger. A lack of food will mean that hunger begins to rise. If hunger gets too large, people will begin to die of starvation, and they will be weaker, making them more prone to disease. Finally, you have crime, which is largely controlled by having enough goods and having enough guard squads relative to your total population. Goods are, basically whatever you'd want to buy. If you could think of a good that you wish to buy, goods here can somewhat represent that. A surplus of goods means you'll get enough heat stamps. If you have a lack of goods, you will get less heat stamps from your population, which you'll be able to see in this tooltip if you are lacking in them. Heat stamps are, like prefabs, needed to build pretty much everything and pay for almost everything, something we'll get into later on. If crime gets too large, you'll start to have issues where people will be injured or even killed due to growing levels of crime. And if any of these problems grow to severe levels, they will begin to cause tension in your city. If tension gets too high in your city, reaching catastrophic levels, your game will be at risk of ending. You will get an 80-week timer from an event to reduce it to severe. If it is too high for too long, the game will end, as the city will fall. With that said, we are going to go to your workforce and population next. Your population is incredibly important in this game. After all, they represent the people of your city, their demands, and the workforce from them. The higher your population, the more workers you have for your workforce. And the percentage of the population that are workers largely depends on laws, which we will cover later. The more people you have, the more workers you have. But the more people you have, the more demand you'll have for shelter, food, and goods. Not to mention, each district you build, which we'll get into in a moment, has its own demands. Your population can grow from various benefits such as laws or buildings. It can also be halted if there is a severe issue, such as high cold during a whiteout, high hunger, high disease, high squalor. Basically anything you could think of that would reasonably stop population from growing, like high crime, will usually slow this down. With that quick covering, we will get into your districts and buildings next, as they are very important to your game. Districts are exactly what they sound like. They're districts you build for various needs. The housing district provides shelter at a cost of heat demand and workforce to maintain it. The food districts will make food if placed on the proper deposits to produce food. They also require heat and materials to be maintained. The extraction district will extract a resource, depending on which resource you put it on. As an example, we have an extraction district right here on coal deposits, which is extracting coal at a rate of 187 per day at the moment. Once the deposit is exhausted at this top area right here for the shallow version, this will shut down. There is a way to access the deep veins, which we will go over later. But once this is empty, the extraction district will shut down. Something else that's important to note about districts is two things. Firstly, their area effects. It is possible for districts to affect other districts, as long as enough of them are bordering each other. As an example, this district is being given a 20 heat demand reduction thanks to being near the generator, and is having another 40 heat reduced thanks to being next to housing districts, reducing its heat need in half at the current temperature level. In order to understand whether these bonuses are being applied, you'll want to look for blue tiles and red tiles. These blue tiles, as you can see here, mean that they're going to apply a 20 heat reduction. And please note the pips that you see right there. You need at least 3 of those pips filled for it to apply the bonus. It will give a check mark when there is enough. If you only have 2, it will not apply the bonus. This goes the same for any issues that might appear. If we build it here, for example, next to the extraction district, it will also reduce the heat demand. But as you can see, it will also cause squalor to rise, because they're right next to an extraction district. So it's always good to look for these areas and try to design your districts with adjacency bonuses in mind. There's no point in building a housing district like this, for example, that gives you nothing, when you could build a housing district like this, as an example, which will reduce its heat needs by 40, but also help this housing district reduce its heat need by 20. This housing district, however, will not have its heat demand reduced by 20 because only 2 of its 3 tiles border the new district. You can do this for any of the districts, as you can see here, including logistics districts, but logistics districts are restricted to specific deposits at the edge of your city. Your industrial districts are where prefabs and goods can be made. Now initially, any newly made industrial district will be set to prefab production by default, and will make only prefabs. If you wish for it to make goods, you will need to switch it over. And if you ever expand the district, you will need to switch it back to goods again. Speaking of which, districts can be expanded. At a cost of 50 heat stamps and 50 prefabs, you can expand districts. This expansion will increase the output of the district, but will not increase the demand. Its workforce will not be increased, and its demand will not be increased, but its output will. So for example, if you were to expand this food district, you would see a significant change. Right now it makes 174 food per day. But once the district's expansion is finished, it now makes 187 food per day. But its demand for heat, materials, and workers is still at the base rate. This is at 600 for the food district like it should be. 40 for the food district as a base demand for heat, and 25 as a base demand for materials. Like extraction districts, if the deposit that the food district is on runs out, it will not be able to function anymore until you access the deep deposits. And to access deep deposits, you need a specific building, which we will get into now. Buildings are additional benefits that you can add to your districts. A lot of those building slots are unlocked by expanding the district first. As an example, a dense housing district is a district that has been expanded once for housing and will have a single building slot. You can expand housing districts twice to get up to 2 building slots. Meanwhile, sorry. Meanwhile, your industrial districts, logistics districts, extraction districts, and food districts will have one building slot already available to you by default, and they can be expanded once again to get a second building slot. Buildings are effectively bonuses to your districts. They have their own demands, outputs, and requirements, as well as construction costs, but are usually better than building a whole new district for the same problem. To give you an example, the salvaging factory that we constructed in the industrial district produces both prefabs and goods at the same time at a cost of 400 workers, 40 materials, and at least 40 heat demand, depending on the temperature and its base demand. As a result, it allows our industrial district to make goods and prefabs at the same time, allowing us to sustain both our need for prefabs and our need for goods. For extraction districts or food districts, you can establish things such as the dust coal mine, which will increase the amount of coal being mined out at the cost of an increase to disease. This is but one of many ways to address resource issues that you might have if you feel like you're not making enough resources. Same goes for the bio-waste hothouse here. It is making additional food, allowing us to extract more at once per day. Next is going to be communities and factions. At the start of your city, you will have at least 2 communities. Usually 2 of these communities will be of different ideological zeitgeists. These zeitgeists are the deciding factor of what they support. You could also think of it as an ideology. It is their belief on how the city should be run and how the world should be. For example, we have our foragers and our mechanists. These 2 are on opposite ends of the spectrum. The foragers support adaptation, while the mechanists support progress. As a result, they will get upset if the city is opposite to their favored ideology or direction. Your relationship with communities also matters a good deal. If communities are not hostile to you, you'll be able to ask them to raise funds for heat stamps. This is very useful, especially early on when you have few people and aren't generating as many heat stamps as we are now. If the communities really like you, they'll be willing to help you de-radicalize factions, but that requires them to really like you. And if a community is upset with you, say skeptical or hostile, there's an increased risk they'll begin trying to join their radical faction. Factions are, as stated, they are the more radical version of communities. Factions are more in-depth, as they have the fervor system, as well as additional abilities depending on which faction has appeared. They still have the same system where you can increase their trust through various means, such as agendas, promises, and giving them heat stamps. But you can also promote your favorited faction in the council, giving them additional seats and reducing their fervor. We'll go over the council later. You can also condemn them. This will upset them, but it will knock them out of the council if you need to do so. You can also do the same thing with favors, raising funds, or if you want to be a little more violent, demanding them with the enforcement of guards. Factions are a little different from communities, however. They will support 3 different zeitgeists, or ideologies, in their belief for how the city should be run. And your full list is adaptation or progress, merit or equality, tradition or reason. And whenever one faction has formed, eventually the opposite faction will form, in which case they support the opposite ideology relative to that faction. If a faction does not like you, they will begin to do what is called protests, where they will select a district at random and begin to protest in it, completely shutting down the district, as well as any buildings inside of it. While this will free up the workforce, this will cause the district to be inoperable until the protest is dealt with in some manner. For example, making them not hate you anymore, being at least neutral, would cause a protest to end. Likewise, if a faction likes you, say they're devoted, such as the Icebloods here, there is a chance that they will begin a periodic rally. Rallies will not disable your districts. Then they will bring a reoccurring bonus that you can apply to it. For example, if the Icebloods were to start a rally, say in this housing district, I could then ask them from an event if they could keep generating heat stamps so long as that rally exists, giving me some additional heat stamps for the duration. These rallies will also cause them to gain more followers as time goes on. But if you're going to be on their side, usually having them be more of the city is favorable to you in the end. And all of these, the communities and factions, want to pass laws based on what they support. And in this case, that's when we head to the council hall. And this is where all your laws will be signed. We're going to give it 2 days for its recess to end. Right now, a law is already being decided on because of a previously granted agenda. To go over it again, if you grant a faction an agenda, or a community an agenda, they will decide the next law that goes into the council to be voted on. Now, what you're seeing here with viewers is Twitch integration. You can ignore this for the sake of the tutorial. What we want to look at here is how the vote system works without it. You have people who support this. Usually whoever is proposing it, such as the Icebloods in this case, will likely support it because it aligns with their worldview. Many people will be hesitant if it doesn't align with their worldview, but doesn't align against it. And if it aligns strongly against their worldview, such as the Technocrats faction, when it comes to a merit law, they will be strongly against it. Now, there are several things you can do when it comes to passing a law. You could just vote, and this will let it go through. In this case, your hesitance will roll at random, siding either with for or against to pass a law. You can also negotiate. And negotiations work in multiple ways. As an example, the Technocrats will not negotiate because this is against their worldview, and the Icebloods won't negotiate because they all support the law already. They want it. But for our sake, the ones who will negotiate with us because they don't have an active promise and are hesitant can be negotiated with. In this case, you can ask them to help pass a law or help prevent a law from passing at your desire. And then they will want you to promise one of 3 terms. And this is a promise. They will expect you to fulfill this. If you do, your relations with that community or faction will improve, and your trust will increase for a little bit of time. But if you fail to uphold your promise, this will hurt your relation with that faction or community, and it will damage your trust since you are not viewed as a trustworthy leader. And depending on which terms you do, you can either use it to help solidify the passing of a law, or make it more likely that that law might not pass at all, if you yourself are against it. We're going to go down here now at the bottom to check the laws themselves, as you have different lists of laws. You have survival, which deals with progress and adaptation. You have the city, which deals with merit and equality. And then you have society, which deals with tradition and reason. There is also a 4th set of laws called the rule laws. These work differently, and we'll go over them last. For now, if there's any law you ever wish to pass, and there's not a law currently on the table, you can normally come over here and pick a law to begin to pass by proposing. Note that if you propose a law, you yourself, it does not immediately force you to go through the vote. You can always backtrack later. It will also show you the initial stance of who is for it, hesitant, and against it, so you can think on now if whether you'd be able to pass this, or if it's going to be too difficult and you need to try again later. Some laws, as you can see, are currently locked, such as waste heat conversion. These need to be researched, or an event needs to fire for it. Normally, these just need to be researched, and you'll be able to interact with them. Everyone has laws they support, everyone has laws they're against. Many of these laws also have events tied to them, such as paid essentials and productive outsiders, as well as the unproductive due maintenance, etc. Lots of these do have events tied to them that will eventually appear as long as the law is in effect for long enough. You can also, if you ever really want to, try to change a law back to where it's now no longer in effect, if you don't like the current law as it is. But again, you may need to negotiate your way into passing that, depending on who has power and how much. And remember, how much of the city that the faction is or community will decide how many votes they have in the council. If you're promoting factions, they're going to have more seats. That's going to give them more power to decide what can and can't get through the council. Communities are more moderate, and it will be easier to convince them to go various ways, but depending on what you're doing, you may find that they have become too weak and the faction's too powerful. It's always worth keeping in mind who you want to support and what you're going for. because someone might stand in the way of that attempt of progress towards your version of utopia. Speaking of laws and utopia, your rule laws work differently. While most laws require a simple majority of 51 votes to pass, rule laws will require 67 of the 100 council members to vote for it to pass. Communities will not vote based on ideology, but entirely based on their relationship with you. If tension is high in the city, they will be more inclined to give you power in the hopes that this will calm down the situation in the city. But again, your relationship still strongly matters. Currently, with some of them really supporting me, the Icebloods are somewhat hesitant, somewhat for giving me power. But the Technocrats, who do not like me as much, are more in disagreement, as well as are the neutral factions too, since they are neutral towards me rather than favorable. If you want to pass rule laws to strengthen your power as steward, you're going to need to get either a lot of people to like you, or to get the factions that strongly support you to be a simple majority in the council. You can also work to increase tension, therefore pressuring them into giving you additional powers. And each one has additional powers that will grant you more and more strength to control the city. If you can sign the first 6 rule laws into effect, which they will be in effect permanently once signed, you can then sign the captain's authority law, effectively abolishing the council and the stewardship entirely, and allowing you yourself to become the new captain of the city. And with that covered, it's now time to cover your idea tree and cornerstones. We previously discussed this before, but the Zeitgeists are the ideas that everyone follows. They are also cornerstones of your city. If you fill this bar all the way up, for example, let's see if we can find one filled up. Not quite yet. But if these are full, you can actually embrace the cornerstone for an additional bonus. I won't spoil what does what here, but each cornerstone can be embraced. However, if you were to embrace adaptation, for example, you will not be able to embrace progress. And if you have embraced adaptation, any progress buildings or laws will generate tension in your city. But how do ideas themselves work? How does research work? That is with the help of communities. Each community has a solution to a problem. For example, the dust coal mine that we build in our extraction districts to mine out more coal per day is an idea thought up by those who support adaptation. However, progress has a different idea that needs less workers, makes more coal, but increases squalor and uses more materials. If we want, we can spend heat stamps to do this research. Whoever we assign the research to will get a slight relations bonus at the end, and we will be able to use that idea, which will also further progress to additional ideas. For example, once an idea on coal mines is done, you will gain access to advanced coal mines, pump jacks, and geothermal plant research, which can then go even further to their own ideas in advanced buildings. If you see this symbol right here, this is to help to tell you that there is a promise you made to research a certain type of building. Something that we're researching right now is this pressurized coal liquefactor to turn coal into oil. So if you've ever made a promise to a faction to research a certain idea, the game will do its best to help you find that idea. That way you know which category it is in, and which one it is. Just because you research one idea as well, though, doesn't mean you can't do the other ideas. As long as someone supports a certain ideology or Zeitgeist, or Cornerstone, what have you, you will be able to research that type, as long as they are not a radical idea or radical law. As we can see here, some of these laws are in red. These are considered radical ideas. Usually you will need to move along a cornerstone to a certain progress to envision these ideas. As an example, guard immunity from tradition. With enough progress towards the tradition cornerstone, guard immunity becomes available. These are considered radical ideas that can polarize your communities and factions. It also helps tremendously progress towards filling up a cornerstone. You could regard these as harder to pass because they are radical, but usually the problem is that some of your people will not support this. It is more of a dystopia for them. But anything that does not have the red words of radical idea or the red coloring around it is not considered radical by your people, and is therefore mostly acceptable. Of course, those who support reason will oppose tradition and vice versa. But each problem has multiple solutions. If you want to unlock new laws, such as where we got the unproductive due maintenance, or its alternative all due maintenance, you will need to research the idea of that law to form it and shape it in order to pass it. Many of the researches here, such as Undercity, are various laws to pass, and they can even lead to their more radical ideas with radical laws that might not be something to enact. New buildings are also researched here as well. Furthermore, there is also hubs, which is a subset, sort of like buildings that are built next to districts. You can also research these too, each one having an effect shown by the symbol here, such as trust, production efficiency, tension, materials, workforce, disease, and crime. What ideas you want to go for and which ones you want to support is up to you. It depends on which cornerstones you wish to support. They have their differences, and you should look at each one carefully. As an example, the advanced blasting coal mine increases squalor, making 360 coal for 300 workers. The advanced shaft coal mine uses 400 workers, makes 300 coal, but does not create any disease or squalor. They both use the same amount of materials. Go over each one, align them carefully, and figure out which one you want. If you recall, I mentioned adaptive pumps and oil pumps for the generator. Your generator upgrade is one of the few technologies that once you have researched it, you are locked off from the alternative path. It is, to my memory, the only time you are locked off. The only other time you're locked off from doing a certain technology is either a restriction in the story, or because a community or faction does not exist that supports the idea or the cornerstone of that idea. Once you have picked either the adaptive pumps or the oil pumps, you are locked into that type of generator for the rest of your game. The adaptive pumps allow you to run the generator on oil, coal, and steam. You can run it together with all three if you wish, instead of just coal. The alternative is the progress version called oil pumps. This will cause it to run on only oil, but the heat generated from that oil will be greatly increased. You can also upgrade the generator 2 additional times, unlocking additional powers for each one, each of them with their own differences. As an example, the level 2 version of the adaptive generator allows you to set the intake optimization of the generator. This allows you to decide which of the 3 resources will get an increased heat yield, including for oil. Though this will not be as good as the oil pumps on its own, it allows you to be more versatile in what you have and what you need. The generator will always try to use a fuel mix that is most optimal. If coal is producing the most heat right now with the intake optimization on coal, it will try to use coal the most. If it can only use oil, then it will only use oil. Or, if oil is the most optimal, it will try to prioritize oil. If you reach certain instances where it has a weird number like this, it will still use oil as much as possible, but then start to use coal to balance it out to an even number, if necessary. It entirely depends on what your heat needs currently are. With that said, one more thing to cover here in this basics video is exploring the Frostland as well as colonies, not to mention settlements themselves by extension. Once you have built a single logistics district near the edge of your city, you will have access to Frostland teams. These teams allow you to explore the Frostland. This is where you will be able to uncover various regions, with more difficult regions requiring more Frostland teams and usually being more dangerous unless you take the necessary measures to handle it. It will take time to chart these lands, and you will be able to reduce this time as necessary. Whenever exploring the Frostland, you will be able to be told possible findings. As an example, we know that exploring this area is likely to reveal oil to us, while here we're likely to find goods, food, prefabs, and people that we can bring back to the city. Some of the locational points you find are places that you can establish as an outpost. In that case, you will need to either build a trail, which is what you'll have access to at the start of the game, or a skyway, which is a more advanced trade route that you can unlock through technological research. As long as you have all the costs, which we currently lack the Frostland teams to do it, you will be able to establish that route. In order to establish a route to the city, it must link up with one of these points right here established by the logistics district in the city. These little hooks right next to the city. If it does not connect to that point, it will not feed back into the city as you're seeing here. You can select one point and then try to lead it along to another point to connect it. And just because you have it set here, doesn't mean you have to stop there. You can keep going as far as you like. But each one increases the amount of time it's going to take and applies additional relative cost. If you wish to branch off from your currently established routes towards another location, you can also do that as well. But you have to start somewhere at one of the hooks or one of your current skyways or trails. If at any point you have built a trail first, for example, but now you wish to upgrade it to a skyway, simply build over the trail with the same route that you've already made it for. So if we already have a trail from this coal mine right here all the way to the city, we only need to build the skyway over that exact same area following the hooks, and the game will upgrade them automatically with the required cost. Now, you realize this must be saying coal mine settlement, which is significantly different from your outposts. Outposts are limited. They will eventually run out of deposits, much like deposits in your city. Once they do, they will be permanently disabled, no longer able to be utilized. Though they will not impact your trails or skyways once they're unable to be used. As an example, we are harvesting steam cores from a military vault, but it will soon run out and no longer be usable. However, settlements are different. By using manpower, as well as some Frostland teams and various sustainment requirements, which are different for each settlement, you will be able to indefinitely produce a type of resource. In this case, various coal mines that can be exhausted as outposts can also become settlements. Any outpost that can be made into a settlement will have this gold symbol right here around it, but will also say possible settlement at the top of its description. If you wish to create a settlement, you will require a workforce to send along with prefabs and steam cores. You will also need to meet its minimum requirements to sustain itself, as well as have at least 10 Frostland teams to establish it. The deposits are completely permanent and can never run out. Once you establish a settlement, you can upgrade it once to make them immune to whiteouts and further increase their output, but otherwise, that is it. And keep in mind, when it asks for workforce, you will be sending people from your city to permanently live at these settlements for the rest of the game. They can never leave those settlements. They will be there forever. You can turn them off if you can no longer meet certain requirements and need to save up and don't need certain resources it makes anymore. But otherwise, they will be permanently producing and permanently sending them back to your city. Colonies are a little different. They are extensions of your city. There's a colony for fuel, a colony for materials, and a colony for food. Each one will have regular shallow deposits of various resources shown here. Steam is technically a fully indefinite resource. It does not seem to ever deplete in the game. Anything with an indefinite symbol, such as a deep coal vein, for example, lasts practically indefinitely. In theory, you could eventually exhaust these, but this would require several thousand weeks of gameplay, something you likely won't reach for a great deal of your time. So each colony has something that it can be set to, but colonies are like your city. Once you colonize them, you will be able to build inside of them as if they were the city itself. They will have a single community called Colonist. There will not be an issue of tension in the city, but it will have the same 5 problems of hunger, disease, cold, squalor, and crime, with its own needs for shelter, food, materials, goods, and heat. If established, you will be able to trade between these colonies. A colony can trade with the city, and a city can trade with any colony. As you see here, a trail can allow the shipping of 250 units of any resource. That is for the sake of your colonies and your city. The Skyway will allow you to ship more, up to 600 units. And various buildings for your logistics districts can increase this amount further. And keep in mind, though, that while colonies can fall, and you'll be fine if they do, if your city falls at any point in the game, it's game over. Even if you have 3 additional colonies with tens of thousands of people established, if the city falls, that's it. The game ends. And each colony can build the same 5 districts as before. Logistics, food, housing, extraction, and industrial. And each one has things it's best at. You can also build various buildings there, including any radical buildings that you may have developed over the course of your playthrough. Speaking of the deep deposits, I do need to go over that. The deep melting drill allows you to access deep deposits that are virtually unlimited. They do increase the production efficiency and increase squalor, but this will effectively allow you to access a deposit indefinitely at the cost of a steam core. You can dismantle these to get your steam core back, so don't worry if you no longer have a deposit there. But if we allow this deep drill in the food district to build really quick, oh, you now see we went from 55 weeks of food left to 56,000 weeks at our current daily production rate. It also increased our total output by 65 points, allowing us to produce even more food as well as access more for longer. This is very useful, and anything with an indefinite symbol will have that same deposit. It can eventually run out, but as you're seeing from the timer, it's going to take a very long time. I think the last thing to go over at this point is that whiteouts will cover the map, and if they are ever covering various parts of the map, you will not be able to explore to them. Now, if you are bringing people back into your city, for example, with your scouts, do not worry, the whiteout will not remove them or kill them. The scouts are effectively immune to the whiteout once they're already en route to a mission. If the whiteout covers a region they're exploring, they will simply cancel the expedition automatically and come straight home. If they're bringing anything home, like, coal that you found on the side or people in need, they will bring them to the city no matter what, even if the whiteout has begun to affect the city itself. So don't worry too much about your scouts' well-being. You should only worry if the area's threat level is higher than safe, as then they could be injured or killed, which the game will tell you here up front in center if that is going to happen. It will not hide that from you, it will let you know if there is a risk. With that said, I believe we have covered all the basics that one would want to cover in the city. The only thing left to show you really quick would be the construction of hubs, such as stockpiles to increase your stockpile capacity of various resources, which you may need to last longer whiteouts in Utopia, and the heating hubs, which can reduce heat as long as you meet the 3 pips requirement. These can be useful if you're having a problem with heat and need to reduce the total amount. With careful city planning, you can easily affect several districts, while poor city planning, you might barely affect even one. With all that said, I believe we have covered the basics of Frostpunk 2 here. There are tutorials in the game if you have additional questions or information covering many different segments of the city, including things like the idea tree, council, and negotiations, as well as city direction and trust. If at any point you are confused about something, it is good to refer to the tutorial, which you can find at the top right of your screen over here, next to your settings and the menu. With that said, I hope you found this to be informative. I hope it went over things that confused people in various ways. And if you have any questions or thoughts that would improve this further, do let me know. And thank you very much for watching. If it helped, please let me know. And I hope to do more videos like this in the future, possibly with editing, but we're going to see how this goes. Until then, see you next time.